My name is Charlotte Thompson, and I'm 28 years old. I thought the hardest day of my life was standing outside the courthouse with my divorce papers finally signed. After 2 years of a toxic marriage, I was ready to rebuild. But then my phone rang. It was Dorothy Henderson, our family lawyer. "Charlotte," she said, her voice tight with concern, "your brother Michael is suing you. He wants everything your father left you." I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. This was my brother who had hugged me at Dad's funeral 2 years ago, promising he'd always protect me. The same brother who was now trying to destroy me. Before I dive into this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories that will shock you. You won't believe what we discovered in that forgotten safe that changed everything. Let me take you back to the beginning so you understand how we got here. Our family wasn't perfect, but I never imagined it would come to this. My father, Robert Thompson, owned a successful woodworking company in Grand Rapids, Michigan. For 30 years, Thompson Custom Furniture had been his pride and joy. Mom Helen died when I was 12 years old from cancer. That loss changed everything in our house. Michael was my older brother by 5 years. Growing up, Dad always made it clear that Michael was the chosen one. "Michael will take over the company," Dad would say at dinner, "and Charlotte will have a beautiful family someday." It was just understood that Michael was the heir apparent because he was the firstborn son. After Mom died, Dad became even more focused on traditional roles. Michael could do no wrong in his eyes. When Michael crashed Dad's truck at 17, Dad just bought him a new one. When Michael barely graduated high school, Dad said it didn't matter because business sense isn't taught in books. Meanwhile, I had to earn a scholarship to University of Michigan and work part-time at a local diner to pay for my own expenses. Michael, on the other hand, never seemed to worry about money. Dad gave him a credit card with no limit. Michael bounced between community college classes, never finishing anything. He'd start a semester, then drop out to focus on learning the business, but mostly he just partied with his friends and spent Dad's money on expensive clothes and gadgets. I graduated with a degree in business administration, hoping maybe Dad would see my potential. But when I suggested ideas for the company, Dad would pat my head and say, "That's nice, sweetheart, but Michael handles the business side." It hurt, but I accepted it. That was just how our family worked. 2 years ago, everything changed when Dad suffered a massive heart attack at the factory. He was only 62 years old. The doctors said it was instant. At the funeral, Michael broke down completely. He grabbed me after the service and sobbed into my shoulder. "Charlotte," he whispered, "it's just us now. I promise I'll take care of you. I'll always protect you. We're all we have left." I believed him. Despite everything, Michael was still my big brother. A week after the funeral, Dorothy Henderson called us to her office to read Dad's will. The law firm was downtown Grand Rapids, in one of those old brick buildings with creaky floors and walls lined with legal books. Michael and I sat in leather chairs across from Dorothy's mahogany desk. The will was exactly what I expected. Michael inherited the company and the main house, a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial on Lake Drive, worth about $400,000. I received the small lake cottage that had been our summer retreat, worth maybe $150,000 plus $50,000 in cash. Michael reached over and squeezed my hand. "Don't worry, sis," he said. "You'll always have a place in the family business if you want it." I smiled and nodded. It seemed fair. Michael was the older son, and Dad had always planned for him to run things. For the next year and a half, I rarely heard from Michael. I was dealing with my crumbling marriage to Jonathan Miller, a man Dad had never approved of. Jonathan turned out to be controlling and emotionally abusive. The divorce process was messy and expensive. I assumed Michael was busy learning to run the company and dealing with his own grief. Occasionally, I'd drive by the old house or the factory, but I never stopped. It felt like intruding on Michael's new life as the family patriarch. When I called him a few times, he seemed distant and stressed. "Just dealing with business stuff," he'd say. You wouldn't understand. So I gave him space. That's why Dorothy's phone call hit me like a lightning bolt. My own brother was taking me to court. The next morning, I sat in Dorothy's office staring at the legal documents that would change my life forever. Dorothy Henderson was 50 years old with silver hair and sharp blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She'd been our family lawyer for 15 years, and I'd never seen her look this concerned. "Charlotte," she said, spreading the papers across her desk, "this is serious. Michael isn't just contesting the will. He's claiming you're unfit to inherit anything from your father's estate." My hands trembled as I picked up the court filing. Michael's accusations were brutal. According to the document, I had abandoned the family by marrying against Dad's wishes. It claimed I had shown disrespect and ingratitude by rarely visiting Dad in his final years. Most painfully, it alleged that Dad had expressed regret about leaving me anything to several witnesses. "He's hired Franklin and Associates," Dorothy continued. "Gerald Franklin is one of the most expensive lawyers in Michigan. This isn't some emotional outburst, Charlotte. This is a calculated legal attack." I felt sick. "But Dorothy, the will is legal, right? Dad signed it properly." "Yes, but Michael's team is arguing that your father was under emotional distress when he wrote it. They're claiming he wanted to change it but died before he could. If they can prove that a judge might invalidate your inheritance entirely." The next week, we had our first meeting with Michael's legal team. The conference room at Franklin and Associates was intimidating, all glass and chrome with a view of the Grand River. Michael sat across from me wearing an expensive navy suit I'd never seen before. He wouldn't make eye contact. Gerald Franklin was a tall man in his 60s with perfectly styled gray hair and a voice like polished granite. "Ms. Thompson," he said, "my client is prepared to be reasonable. If you voluntarily relinquish your claim to the estate, we can avoid a messy court battle." I stared at Michael in disbelief. "Michael, what is this? Why are you doing this?" For the first time, he looked at me directly. His eyes were cold, nothing like the loving brother who had comforted me at Dad's funeral. "You hurt Dad, Charlotte," he said quietly. "You married that loser Jonathan against his wishes. You never came home. You made his last years miserable with your selfishness." "That's not true," I protested. "I called Dad every week. I sent him cards. Just because I didn't visit much doesn't mean I didn't care." Michael's lawyer leaned forward. "Ms. Thompson, we have witnesses who will testify that your father expressed deep disappointment about your life choices. He felt betrayed by your marriage and your absence during his illness." "What illness?" I asked. "Dad had a heart attack. It was sudden." Gerald Franklin exchanged a look with Michael. "Your father had been experiencing heart problems for months before he died. He was seeing a cardiologist regularly. Did you know that Ms. Thompson—" My stomach dropped. I had no idea Dad was sick. Why hadn't Michael told me? "You see," Franklin continued smoothly, "while you were focused on your own problems, Michael was caring for your ailing father, taking him to doctor appointments, managing his medications, handling the stress of a failing business. Your father came to realize who his real family was." Michael finally spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper but filled with venom. "You don't deserve Dad's money, Charlotte. You weren't there when he needed you most. I was." Dorothy squeezed my arm under the table. "We'll see you in court," she said firmly. As we left the building, I felt like I was drowning. Had I really been such a terrible daughter? Had Dad died thinking I didn't love him, and why was Michael so different now? The gentle, protective brother I remembered seemed like a stranger. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every conversation I'd had with Dad in his final months. Yes, I'd been distracted by my marriage problems. Yes, I hadn't visited as much as I should have. But I'd never stopped loving him, and I certainly never imagined he was sick. Something about Michael's story didn't add up, but I couldn't put my finger on what. All I knew was that I needed to understand what had really happened in those final months of Dad's life. I decided to do some investigating of my own. If Michael was painting me as the neglectful daughter, I needed to know the truth about what had been happening at the company and in Dad's life. My first stop was the factory. Thompson Custom Furniture was located in an industrial area south of Grand Rapids, in a building Dad had owned for 20 years. I knew Eugene Carter, the head accountant, had worked there since I was in high school. He was a quiet man in his 50s with thick glasses and a gentle manner. I found Eugene in his small office surrounded by ledger books and computer printouts. When he saw me, his face lit up with genuine warmth. "Charlotte, how are you holding up, honey?" He stood and gave me a fatherly hug. I was so sorry to hear about the legal troubles. "Eugene, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. How was the company doing before Dad died, and how has Michael been managing things?" Eugene's expression grew troubled. He closed his office door and gestured for me to sit down. "Charlotte, I probably shouldn't be talking about this, but your father was like family to me. He'd want you to know the truth." He pulled out a thick folder of financial records. "Your dad built this company from nothing. When he died, we had about $200,000 in business accounts, plus inventory worth another $100,000. We were profitable and growing." "That sounds good," I said. It was good. But Charlotte, in the past 18 months, Michael has withdrawn over $160,000 from those accounts. My heart stopped. "What do you mean?" "Withdrawn for business expenses." Eugene shook his head sadly. "Personal withdrawals. I have the bank records right here. $50,000 in cash withdrawals over 6 months. A $48,000 check made out to BMW of Grand Rapids. $15,000 for something called Vegas Entertainment Services. $10,000 to Paradise Suites Penthouse Rentals." I stared at the numbers, feeling sick. Eugene, did Dad know about any of this? "Some of it, yes. Your father was getting suspicious in his last few months. He asked me to start tracking Michael's spending more carefully. He was worried about Michael's responsibility level, but he hoped that inheriting the company would force Michael to grow up." Eugene pulled out another document. "But Charlotte, there's something else. About 3 months before your dad died, he came to me and said he was thinking about making some changes. He said he'd been watching how you handled your own problems, how you worked multiple jobs to put yourself through college, how you never asked him for money even when your marriage was falling apart. He said he was starting to see real character." Tears welled up in my eyes. "He said that—" "He did. And he also said he was disappointed in Michael's maturity level. He caught Michael in several lies about where the money was going. Your father wasn't stupid, Charlotte. He knew Michael was living way beyond his means." I left the factory with copies of the financial records, my mind reeling. But I needed more information. My next stop was Marlene Foster, Dad's secretary for the past 12 years. Marlene worked out of a small office attached to Dad's workshop. She was a motherly woman in her 60s who had always treated me like one of her own daughters. When I explained why I was there, she immediately invited me in for coffee. "Oh, honey," she said, settling into her chair with a sigh. "I've been waiting for someone to ask the right questions." "What do you mean?" Marlene looked around as if someone might be listening, then leaned forward conspiratorially. "Your father was planning to change his will, Charlotte. He told me so directly." My heart began to race. What did he say?" "It was about 4 months before he passed. He'd been having problems with Michael, money problems. Michael had been forging signatures on company checks. Your father caught him red-handed." "Forging signatures?" "Oh, yes. Michael thought he was clever, but your father always reviewed the books carefully. When he saw his own signature on checks he'd never written, he was furious. But instead of confronting Michael immediately, he decided to test him. He gave Michael more responsibility and watched to see if the stealing would continue." Marlene pulled out a small notebook. "I keep track of everything, dear. Your father asked me to document Michael's activities. The gambling, the expensive purchases, the lies about business trips that were actually vacations." She flipped through several pages. But what really upset your father was discovering that Michael had been intercepting your phone calls. What do you mean? You called the office several times wanting to speak with your father, but Michael would answer and tell you Dad was too busy or out of town. Then he'd tell your father that you hadn't called at all. Your father thought you'd stopped caring about him and you thought he didn't want to talk to you. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Michael did that. For months, honey. Your father was heartbroken thinking you'd abandoned him. Meanwhile, you were respecting what you thought was his desire for space. Michael played you both. Marlene closed her notebook and looked at me seriously. Your father figured it out eventually. About 6 weeks before he died, he answered the phone himself when you called. After that conversation, he told me he was going to see a lawyer about changing his will. He said he'd been wrong about Michael and wrong about you. Did he follow through? Did he see a lawyer? He did. He went to someone new, not Dorothy Henderson. He said he wanted a fresh perspective. Let me think. She paused, searching her memory. Peterson. James Peterson. He has an office downtown. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. If Dad had really been planning to change his will, there might be evidence of his true intentions. This could change everything. But first, I needed to confirm Marlene's story. I drove straight to Peterson & Associates, a small law firm in a converted Victorian house near downtown Grand Rapids. James Peterson was a man in his 40s with a kind face and a reputation for honest dealing. When I explained who I was and why I was there, he looked uncomfortable. Ms. Thompson, I remember your father very well. He was a good man who was deeply troubled about family issues. What did he tell you? Peterson hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. Your father came to me because he'd lost trust in his son. He discovered that Michael had been stealing from the company and lying about it. But more than that, he'd realized that Michael had been deliberately sabotaging your relationship with him. Did he want to change his will? He did. He wanted to leave this business to you and give Michael a smaller inheritance. He felt you'd shown real character and responsibility while Michael had proven himself untrustworthy. My heart was pounding. So did he change it? Do you have a new will? Peterson shook his head sadly. He said he needed time to think it over. Changing a will to disinherit one child in favor of another is a big decision. He wanted to be absolutely sure. He made an appointment to come back the following week with his final decision. But he never came back. No, he died 3 days before our scheduled appointment. I always wondered what he would have decided. As I drove home, my mind was spinning. Dad had been planning to change his will in my favor. He'd discovered Michael's lies and theft. He'd realized the truth about our relationship. But he'd died before he could make it official. Or had he? Peterson said Dad wanted time to think. But what if Dad had made his decision and taken action on his own? What if there was evidence somewhere of his true intentions? I knew I had to search the house where Dad had lived, the house that now belonged to Michael. But how could I get in without arousing suspicion? I called Michael the next morning, trying to keep my voice steady and casual. Hey, I was wondering if I could come by the house sometime and pick up a few things of Mom's that I'd like to have. Maybe some photos or jewelry. There was a long pause before Michael answered. I guess that would be okay. But I don't want you going through Dad's stuff. And you can only have an hour. That's fine. When would be convenient? Tomorrow afternoon, 2 o'clock. I'll be there to supervise. The next day I drove to the house where I'd grown up. It was a beautiful colonial on Lake Drive with a big front porch and mature oak trees in the yard. Michael met me at the door wearing jeans and a t-shirt, but I noticed he was wearing an expensive watch I'd never seen before. Mom's stuff is mostly in the master bedroom, he said curtly. I haven't touched any of it. I went upstairs and spent some time going through Mom's jewelry box and photo albums, but my mind was really focused on Dad's home office downstairs. How could I get Michael out of the house long enough to search it? After about 20 minutes, Michael's phone rang. I could hear him talking in the kitchen about some kind of business emergency at the factory. This was my chance. I need to run over to the shop for a few minutes, he called up to me. Don't go anywhere except Mom's room. As soon as I heard his car pull out of the driveway, I raced downstairs to Dad's office. It was exactly as he'd left it, an old wooden desk, filing cabinets, and bookshelves lined with business manuals and family photos. I started with the desk drawers looking for anything that might indicate Dad had prepared a new will or left instructions about his intentions. I found business correspondence, tax records, and personal letters, but nothing about a will. The filing cabinets were full of company documents and financial records. I was running out of time and I hadn't found anything useful. Then I remembered something from childhood. When Dad was really upset or needed to think through a problem, he would go down to the basement. He had an old workbench down there where he'd tinker with small projects when he needed to clear his head. I hurried downstairs to the basement. It was exactly as I remembered: concrete floors, exposed beams, and Dad's workbench in the corner. The bench was covered with dust, but I could see that someone had been there recently. There were fingerprints in the dust, and a few papers scattered around. I opened the drawers of the workbench one by one. Most contained old tools and hardware, but in the bottom drawer, hidden under a pile of sandpaper, I found a small piece of paper in Dad's handwriting. It was just a few words: "Emergency, behind Mom's portrait, 1947, 1947. That was the year Mom was born. And Mom's portrait hung in the living room upstairs, the large oil painting that Dad had commissioned when they got married. I could hear Michael's car pulling into the driveway. I quickly stuffed the note into my pocket and raced upstairs, getting back to Mom's bedroom just as Michael walked through the front door. "Find what you were looking for?" he asked suspiciously. "Yes, just some photos and a necklace of Mom's. Thanks for letting me come by." As I drove away, my heart was pounding. What did Dad's note mean, behind Mom's portrait, and why 1947? That evening I couldn't stop thinking about it. I kept picturing Mom's portrait in my mind, trying to remember everything about it. It hung on the wall in the living room above the fireplace. It was large, maybe 3 feet by 4 feet, in an ornate gold frame. But what could be behind it? And how could I get back into the house to find out? I called Michael again the next morning. "I forgot to get Mom's wedding ring yesterday. I know she would have wanted me to have it. Could I come by again quickly?" Michael sounded annoyed. "Charlotte, I don't want this to become a regular thing. One more time and that's it." "I understand. I promise this is the last time." "Fine, same time tomorrow. And make it quick." The next afternoon, I returned to the house with a plan. I'd brought a box of old family photos to give Michael, hoping to distract him while I investigated the portrait. "I thought you might like these," I said, handing him the box. "They're pictures from when we were kids." Michael's expression softened slightly as he looked through the photos. For a moment, he almost seemed like my old brother again. "I remember this," he said, holding up a picture of us at a lake cottage. "You caught your first fish that day." While he was distracted, I casually walked over to the fireplace. "I always loved this painting of Mom," I said, reaching up to touch the frame. "Yeah, Dad really treasured that thing," Michael said, still looking through photos. I carefully felt around the edges of the frame, looking for anything unusual. The painting was heavy and securely mounted, but as I pressed against the right side, I felt it give slightly. There was definitely something behind it. But I couldn't investigate further with Michael right there. I needed a better distraction. "Michael," I said, "would you mind making me a cup of coffee? I'm getting a headache and I need to sit down for a minute." "Sure," he said, seeming genuinely concerned. "You do look pale. Are you eating enough?" While he went to the kitchen, I quickly examined the portrait more carefully. The frame was hinged on one side like a medicine cabinet. Behind it was a small wall safe, old and painted to match the wall. The combination lock had 4 numbers. 1947, Mom's birth year. I tried the combination 1947. Nothing happened. I tried different variations: 1947, 4719, 7491. Still nothing. Then I heard Michael coming back with the coffee. I quickly closed the portrait and sat down on the couch, pretending to look through Mom's jewelry box. "Here you go," Michael said, handing me the coffee mug. "Are you sure you're okay? You seem nervous." "I'm fine," I lied, just emotional about going through Mom's things. I spent another few minutes pretending to sort through jewelry, then told Michael I needed to leave. As I drove away, I was frustrated but not defeated. I knew the safe was there, and I was sure 1947 was part of the combination. I just needed to figure out the right sequence. That night I called Dorothy Henderson. "Dorothy, I think Dad may have left something for me. Something Michael doesn't know about. But I need to get back into the house one more time to check. Charlotte, be very careful. If Michael suspects you're investigating, he could claim you're trying to tamper with evidence." "I know. But Dorothy, what if Dad did change his will? What if there's a new version that Michael doesn't know about?" Dorothy was quiet for a moment. "If such a document exists, and it's properly executed, it would supersede the previous will. But Charlotte, that's a big if." The next morning I had an idea. Instead of asking Michael directly, I would wait until I knew he wasn't home. I drove by the house several times over the next few days, learning his routine. On Thursday, I saw him leave for the factory at 9 a.m. His car wasn't in the driveway when I drove by at 10:30. I parked down the street and walked to the house. I still had my old key, and I was hoping Michael hadn't changed the locks yet. The key worked. I quickly disabled the alarm system using the code Dad had used for years' Mom's birthday. I went straight to the living room and opened the portrait. The safe was there waiting for me. This time, I had more time to think about the combination. 1947 was Mom's birth year. But what if it wasn't just the year? What if it was something more specific? I thought about Mom's full birthday, March 15th, 1947, 3/15/47. That was too many numbers. Wait, what if it was just the month and day, 3/15? I tried 3/15/1947. Still nothing. Then I had another idea. What if Dad had used a different significant date? Their wedding anniversary was June 22nd, 1968. 6/22/68. No, that didn't work either. I was getting frustrated and worried about Michael coming home. Then I remembered something else. Dad always said he fell in love with Mom the moment he saw her, which was at a Christmas dance in 1966 when she was 19 years old. 1966. What if the combination was 1966? I tried it. Nothing. I sat back on my heels thinking. What was special about 1947 specifically? It wasn't just that Mom was born that year. Dad had written it down for a reason. Then it hit me. Mom was born on April 7th, 1947, 4/7/47. What if the combination was just 4747? I tried it, and I heard a soft click. The safe door swung open. Inside was a thick manila envelope with my name written on it in Dad's handwriting, "For Charlotte, the truth." My hands were shaking as I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten will dated 3 months before Dad died, along with a notarized signature and witness signatures. But more importantly, there was a long letter addressed to me. I quickly scanned the will. It was the opposite of everything I'd been told. Charlotte Thompson was to inherit the business and the main house. Michael Thompson was to receive the lake cottage and $25,000 in cash. But the letter was what made me break down in tears. "My dearest Charlotte, if you are reading this, then something has happened to me, and you have discovered the truth about your brother. I am writing this because I cannot bear the thought of you believing that I died disappointed in you. The opposite is true. You are everything I could have hoped for in a daughter, and I am ashamed that it took me so long to see it. Michael has been stealing from the company and lying to both of us. He has kept us apart with his deceptions, and for that, I will never forgive him. You called me every week, but Michael told me you were too busy to talk. When I finally answered the phone myself and heard your voice, I realized what he had been doing. Charlotte, you are strong, honest, and capable. You deserve to inherit what I have built, not because you are my daughter, but because you have earned it. I love you, and I am proud of you. Please forgive me for not seeing the truth sooner. Your father, Robert Thompson. I sat on the floor of the living room crying and holding the letter that proved my father had loved me after all. But I also felt a deep sadness for the relationship Michael had stolen from us and the time we'd lost. I carefully put everything back in the envelope and left the house, making sure to reset the alarm and lock the door behind me. Now I had the proof I needed. The question was, what would I do with it? I drove straight to Dorothy's office, my hands still shaking from what I'd discovered. Dorothy took one look at me and immediately closed her door. Charlotte, what happened? You look like you've seen a ghost. I placed the envelope on her desk. I found this in a safe behind Mom's portrait. Dad did change his will, Dorothy. And there's more. Dorothy carefully examined the handwritten will and letter. She put on her reading glasses and studied every detail of the notarization and witness signatures. Charlotte, she said after several minutes, this appears to be completely legitimate. The witnesses are legitimate. The notary seal is authentic. This will is dated 4 months after the previous will that Michael presented to probate court. So it's legal. If it's authentic, and I believe it is, then yes. This supersedes the previous will entirely. According to this document, you inherit the business and the main house. Michael gets the cottage and $25,000. I felt a mixture of relief and dread. Dorothy, what do we do now? First, we need to verify the authenticity of this document beyond any doubt. I'll have a handwriting expert examine it and verify the notary's records. But Charlotte, if this is real, then Michael has been knowingly presenting a false will to the court. What does that mean legally? Dorothy's expression was grim. It means he's committed fraud, potentially criminal fraud. Over the next week, Dorothy worked with experts to authenticate Dad's final will. The handwriting analysis confirmed it was genuinely Dad's writing. The notary, Martha Powell, confirmed in a sworn affidavit that she had notarized Robert Thompson's signature on the date in question. The witnesses, both employees at the bank where Dad had conducted business, verified their signatures. Meanwhile, Dorothy hired a private investigator to look deeper into Michael's financial activities. What we discovered was even worse than I'd imagined. In addition to the money he'd taken from the company, Michael owed $73,000 to Grand River Casino. He'd been gambling heavily for over a year using company funds to cover his losses. He'd also taken out a second mortgage on the main house without reporting it to the probate court. But the most damning evidence was what the investigator found about Michael's living situation. Despite claiming to live in the family home, Michael had been renting a luxury penthouse apartment downtown for 8 months. The apartment cost $3,500 per month, far more than the company's legitimate profits could support. Charlotte, Dorothy said during one of our meetings, your brother has been living a complete lie. He's been using your father's money to fund a lifestyle that would make a corporate executive jealous. I felt sick thinking about it. While I'd been struggling to pay for my divorce and living in a modest apartment, Michael had been living in luxury with money that partially belonged to me. There's something else, Dorothy continued. The investigator found evidence that Michael sold several pieces of your father's antique furniture and tools from the workshop, pieces that should have been part of the estate inventory. He sold Dad's tools. Those tools had been Dad's pride and joy. Some of them handed down from his own father. Apparently, he needed quick cash to cover gambling debts. Charlotte, your brother, is in serious financial trouble. That's probably why he's so desperate to get your inheritance, too. Dorothy sat back in her chair and looked at me seriously. We have a choice here. We can present this evidence to the court and let justice take its course. But you should know that if we do this, Michael will likely face criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement. I thought about the brother who used to read me bedtime stories when I was scared after Mom died. The brother who taught me to ride a bike and defended me from bullies at school. But then I thought about the lies, the manipulation, and the way he'd poisoned my relationship with Dad in his final months. Dorothy, I said finally, I want to talk to Michael first, face to face. before we file anything with the court. Charlotte, I don't think that's wise. He could become desperate if he knows you have evidence against him. I need to give him one chance to explain himself. I need to look him in the eye and ask him why he did this to our family. Dorothy reluctantly agreed, but insisted that the meeting take place in a public location with other people around. I called Michael and asked him to meet me at a coffee shop downtown. I want to talk about the case, I told him. Maybe we can work something out without going to court. We met at Bigby Coffee on Fulton Street on a busy Saturday afternoon. Michael arrived wearing another expensive outfit, a casual shirt and jacket that probably cost more than I spent on clothes in 6 months. So, he said, sliding into the booth across from me, are you ready to be reasonable about this? I'm willing to let you keep the cottage if you sign over your claim to everything else. I studied his face, looking for any trace of the brother I'd once loved. Michael, I want to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Okay. Did you know Dad was planning to change his will before he died? Michael's expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker in his eyes. I don't know what you're talking about. Did you know he discovered you were taking money from the company? Now Michael looked uncomfortable. Charlotte, what are you getting at? I'm asking if you knew that Dad had lost trust in you before he died. I'm asking if you knew he was planning to leave the business to me instead of you. Michael's face flushed red. That's ridiculous. Dad always intended for me to have the business. I'm the son. I'm the one who worked with him. Michael, I know about the casino debts. I know about the penthouse apartment. I know about the forged checks. Michael stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him calculating what I might know and how much trouble he was in. You don't understand, he said finally. I had some cash flow problems, but I was going to pay it all back. The business is profitable. I just needed time to get things sorted out. What about the lies you told Dad about me? What about intercepting my phone calls? Michael's facade finally cracked. You think you're so perfect, don't you? You with your college degree and your independence. You never needed Dad the way I did. You were going to be fine no matter what. But me, I needed the business. I needed the security. So you decided to sabotage my relationship with him. I protected what was mine. Michael snapped his voice loud enough that other customers turned to look at us. Dad built that business for me. He always said it would be mine. Just because you came back around at the end with your sob story about your marriage doesn't mean you deserve to inherit anything. I felt a cold clarity settle over me. This wasn't my brother anymore. Maybe he never had been. Maybe I'd just been too young to see his true nature. Michael, I said quietly, you had so many chances to tell the truth. Even after Dad died, you could have been honest with me. We could have worked together. But instead, you chose to try to destroy me in court. Michael leaned forward, his eyes hard. I'm not going to let you take what's mine, Charlotte. I don't care what you think you know. I'll fight you every step of the way. Even if it means lying under oath, even if it means committing fraud. I'll do whatever it takes, Michael said. And when this is over, you won't get a penny from Dad's estate. I promise you that. As I walked to my car, I felt a strange sense of peace. I'd given Michael every opportunity to come clean, to show remorse, to be the brother I'd once believed he was. Instead, he'd shown me exactly who he really was. It was time to let the truth come out in court. The day of the hearing arrived 3 weeks later. Oakland County Circuit Court was the imposing building with marble floors and high ceilings that made every footstep echo. I sat next to Dorothy at the plaintiff's table, watching Michael and his expensive legal team arrange their materials at the defense table. Judge Margaret Williams presided over the courtroom. She was a woman in her early 60s with gray hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She had a reputation for being fair but tough, especially when it came to family inheritance disputes. This is a hearing to determine the validity of the last will and testament of Robert Thompson, Judge Williams announced. Mr. Franklin, you may present your client's case. Gerald Franklin stood up every inch the confident corporate lawyer. Your Honor, my client, Michael Thompson, is the rightful heir to his father's estate. The existing will clearly states his inheritance, and there is no legitimate reason to contest it. Franklin's argument was polished and well-rehearsed. He painted Michael as the devoted son who had sacrificed his own opportunities to care for his aging father and manage the family business. He portrayed me as the ungrateful daughter who had abandoned the family and only returned when there was money involved. Mr. Thompson was present for every important moment of his father's final years, Franklin said. He managed the business. He took care of his father's medical needs. He was the son Robert Thompson relied on and trusted. When it was time for Michael to testify, he took the stand wearing a perfectly fitted black suit. Under Franklin's questioning, he presented himself as the grieving son who only wanted to honor his father's wishes. I loved my father, Michael said, his voice breaking slightly. Everything I did was to try to live up to his expectations. He built that business for me, and I wanted to make him proud. Franklin asked him about the company's finances. Mr. Thompson, can you explain the business expenditures that Ms. Thompson's counsel has questioned? Those were all legitimate business expenses, Michael answered smoothly. Marketing equipment upgrades, business development. My father gave me full authority to manage the company's finances. And what about your relationship with your sister during your father's final months? Michael looked directly at me, and for a moment his mask slipped. I could see the cold calculation in his eyes. I tried to maintain a relationship with Charlotte, but she was going through her own problems. Her marriage was falling apart, and she became distant from the family. Dad was hurt by that. When Dorothy cross-examined Michael, she started gently. Mr. Thompson, you testified that you had full authority over the company's finances. Can you explain this $50,000 cash withdrawal from March of last year? Michael shifted in his chair. That was for operating expenses. What kind of operating expenses require $50,000 in cash? Various things. Small suppliers who preferred cash transactions. Dorothy pulled out a bank record. This withdrawal was made at the Grand River Casino's ATM. Can you explain that? Michael's face reddened. I don't recall the specific location. Mr. Thompson, do you gamble? Franklin objected, but Judge Williams allowed the question. Occasionally, Michael admitted. For entertainment. Would you say losing $73,000 at Grand River Casino over 18 months constitutes occasional entertainment? The courtroom was silent. Michael stared at Dorothy, clearly not expecting her to have specific figures. I don't know where you got those numbers, he said finally. From the casino's records, which we subpoenaed. Dorothy placed a thick stack of papers in evidence. Your Honor, these records show systematic gambling losses funded by withdrawals from Thompson Custom Furniture's business accounts. Dorothy continued her questioning methodically, destroying Michael's credibility. She presented evidence of the penthouse apartment, the luxury car purchased with company funds, and the sale of Dad's antique tools. With each revelation, Michael became more defensive and contradictory. When Dorothy asked him about intercepting my phone calls to Dad, Michael denied it completely. I never prevented my sister from talking to our father, he insisted. Then can you explain why Marlene Foster, your father's secretary, documented multiple instances of you telling Mr. Thompson that Charlotte was too busy to take his calls? Michael's composure finally cracked. Marlene is mistaken. She's an old woman with a faulty memory. Mr. Thompson, Dorothy said calmly, are you calling Ms. Foster a liar? I'm saying she's confused about what happened. Judge Williams looked stern. Mr. Thompson, please answer the questions directly. The tension in the courtroom was mounting, but Dorothy wasn't finished. Mr. Thompson, are you aware that your father visited attorney James Peterson 3 months before his death? I watched Michael's face carefully. For just a second, I saw fear in his eyes. No, I'm not aware of that. Mr. Peterson will testify that your father wanted to change his will because he had discovered your deceptive practices and wanted to leave the business to your sister instead. Franklin jumped up. Objection. This is hearsay. Sustained, Judge Williams said. The jury will disregard. But the damage was done. Everyone in the courtroom had heard Dorothy's statement. When Dorothy finished her cross-examination, Michael looked shaken and angry. As he stepped down from the witness stand, he glared at me with unconcealed hatred. Franklin called a few character witnesses for Michael, but Dorothy's cross-examination had been devastating. When it was our turn to present evidence, Dorothy started with the financial records Eugene Carter had provided. Eugene testified clearly and precisely about Michael's unauthorized withdrawals and questionable business expenses. Marlene Foster testified about Dad's plans to change his will and Michael's interference with my phone calls. James Peterson testified about Dad's visit to his office and his intention to disinherit Michael in favor of me. But the moment that changed everything was when Dorothy stood up and said, "Your Honor, we have one final piece of evidence to present." She walked to our table and picked up the manila envelope I'd found in Dad's safe. "We have discovered Mr. Robert Thompson's final will and testament, dated 3 months before his death and properly notarized and witnessed." The courtroom erupted. Franklin was on his feet, objecting. Michael looked like he'd been hit by lightning. Judge Williams called for order. Ms. Henderson approached the bench. Dorothy presented the will and Dad's letter to the judge. Judge Williams examined the documents carefully, then called for a recess to have them authenticated by a court expert. During the break, I sat in the hallway watching Michael pace back and forth, while Franklin tried to calm him down. Michael kept shaking his head and gesturing angrily. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but it was clear that this development had completely blindsided them. When court resumed, Judge Williams announced that the documents had been verified as authentic. She allowed Dorothy to read portions of Dad's letter into the record. "I cannot bear the thought of you believing that I died disappointed in you," Dorothy read. "You are everything I could have hoped for in a daughter, and I am ashamed that it took me so long to see it." There wasn't a sound in the courtroom as Dorothy continued reading Dad's words about Michael's deception and theft. When she finished, Judge Williams looked at Michael and his lawyer. "Mr. Franklin, do you wish to present any evidence challenging the authenticity of this will?" Franklin looked defeated. "No, Your Honor. We request time to review these documents with our client." "Mr. Thompson," Judge Williams said directly to Michael, "do you have any explanation for why this will was not presented to the probate court when your father's estate was being settled?" Michael stood up slowly. "I was not aware of its existence, Your Honor." "Mr. Thompson, this will was found in a safe in the house you inherited. Are you testifying under oath that you were unaware of this safe?" I watched Michael struggle with his answer. If he admitted knowing about the safe, he'd be admitting that he'd hidden evidence from the court. If he denied it, he'd be lying under oath in front of a room full of witnesses. "I knew about the safe," he said finally, "but I didn't know the combination." "So you made no effort to open it before presenting the previous will to probate court?" "I." "No, Your Honor." Judge Williams' expression was stern. "Mr. Thompson, do you understand that failing to disclose the existence of a potential will to the probate court is a serious matter?" Michael's voice was barely audible. "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Williams recessed the court to review all the evidence, but when she returned an hour later, her decision was swift and unambiguous. "Based on the evidence presented, I find that the will dated 3 months before Robert Thompson's death is valid and supersedes all previous wills. The estate will be distributed according to this final testament." She looked directly at Michael. "Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for potential prosecution for fraud and embezzlement. Mr. Thompson, you are ordered to make full restitution for all unauthorized withdrawals from Thompson Custom Furniture's accounts." The gavel came down with a sound like thunder. Michael sat frozen in his chair as people began filing out of the courtroom. Franklin gathered his papers quickly and left without saying goodbye to his client. I stood up slowly, feeling a strange mixture of relief and sadness. I'd won, but I'd also lost my brother forever. As I was leaving the courthouse, Michael caught up with me in the parking lot. "Charlotte, wait," he called out. I turned around. He looked smaller somehow, deflated and defeated. "I want you to know," he said quietly, "that I never meant for it to go this far." "What did you mean for it to go, Michael?" He ran his hands through his hair. I was scared. The gambling got out of control and I owed people money. Dangerous people. I thought if I could just get control of Dad's assets, I could pay everyone back and start over. "You could have come to me. We could have worked something out." Michael shook his head. "You wouldn't have understood. You've always been the good one, Charlotte. The responsible one. I was the screw-up, and I knew it. So you decided to destroy me instead of facing your problems. I was desperate," he said, "and I convinced myself that you didn't really need the money. You're smart, you're capable. You would have been fine either way." I looked at my brother, this man who had shared my childhood and knew all my secrets, and I felt nothing but pity. "Goodbye, Michael," I said. "Charlotte, please. Can't we find a way to fix this? We're family." I stopped walking. "No, Michael. Family doesn't lie to each other. Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't try to destroy each other in court. You stopped being my family the day you decided to betray Dad's trust and try to take what wasn't yours." I got in my car and drove away, leaving Michael standing alone in the courthouse parking lot. 2 months later, I was settled into my new office at Thompson Custom Furniture. Eugene Carter had stayed on as head accountant, and Marlene Foster continued as office manager. Together, we were rebuilding the business Michael had nearly destroyed. The company was profitable again. I'd implemented new financial controls and transparency measures. Most importantly, I'd created a positive work environment where people felt valued and respected. Michael had pleaded guilty to embezzlement charges and received 2 years probation plus restitution requirements. He'd lost the cottage to pay his gambling debts and legal fees. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd moved to another state and was working as a salesman somewhere. He called me once about 6 months after the trial. "Charlotte," he said, "I've been going to Gamblers Anonymous. I'm getting help." "I'm glad to hear that, Michael. Do you think maybe someday we could try to rebuild our relationship?" I thought about it for a long time before answering. "Michael, I hope you get the help you need. I hope you find peace and build a good life for yourself. But I can't have you in my life. Too much has happened." "I understand," he said quietly, and hung up. I established a foundation in Dad's name to help women who were facing family legal battles without adequate resources. Every month, we helped several women who were being taken advantage of by family members, often in inheritance disputes similar to mine. The work was meaningful, but it also reminded me daily of how fortunate I'd been to find the truth in time. I kept Dad's letter in a frame on my desk. Sometimes when I was having a difficult day, I would read his words about being proud of me and believing in my strength. It helped me remember that the relationship I'd thought was lost had actually been there all along. The house on Lake Drive felt too big for just me, so I sold it and used the money to expand the business. I kept some of Dad's furniture and tools, the pieces that held the most memories. I never remarried, but I dated and had relationships. I learned to trust again slowly and carefully. The experience with Michael had taught me to pay attention to actions rather than words, to look for consistency between what people said and what they did. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if I hadn't found Dad's final will. Would Michael have succeeded in taking everything? Would I have spent the rest of my life believing that Dad had died, disappointed in me? But I tried not to dwell on those thoughts. The truth had a way of revealing itself, and justice had been served. On quiet Sunday mornings, I would drive out to the cemetery where Mom and Dad were buried. I would sit by their graves and tell them about the business, about the foundation, about my life. And I would thank Dad for having the courage to write down the truth even when it was painful. His final act of love had been to ensure that justice would eventually prevail. The lake cottage that had once been Michael's inheritance was eventually sold to pay his debts. Sometimes I drove by it when I was in that part of town. It looked smaller than I remembered, and somehow sadder. I learned that betrayal by family cuts deeper than any other kind of pain, but it also taught me the difference between blood relation and true family. True family supports you, believes in you, and wants the best for you even when it's difficult. I found that kind of family among my employees, my friends, and the women I helped through the foundation. We weren't related by blood, but we were connected by something stronger: mutual respect, shared values, and genuine care for each other's well-being. The experience changed me in fundamental ways. I became more cautious, but also more confident. More protective of myself, but also more generous with others who needed help. More aware of people's capacity for deception, but also more appreciative of genuine kindness. I never regretted fighting for the truth, even though it cost me my relationship with my brother. Some prices are worth paying and some battles are worth fighting, especially when the alternative is living a lie. As I sit here today, 5 years after that phone call from Dorothy Henderson that changed my life, I can honestly say that I'm at peace. The business is thriving. The foundation is helping people. I have good friends and a life I've built on my own terms. I learned that sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. But I also learned that the truth has a power all its own, and that standing up for yourself, even against family, is sometimes the most loving thing you can do. Most importantly, I learned that my father's love for me was real even when I couldn't feel it. His final gift wasn't the inheritance or the business. It was the knowledge that he had seen who I really was and found me worthy of his pride. That knowledge sustains me still. So if you're facing a situation where family members are trying to take advantage of you, don't be afraid to stand up for yourself. Document everything. Seek legal help. And remember that sometimes the people who claim to have your best interests at heart are really just looking out for themselves. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, investigate. If someone's story doesn't add up, dig deeper. And never ever let anyone convince you that you don't deserve what's rightfully yours. The truth may be buried, but it's never really lost. Sometimes it just takes courage to dig it up. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have fought back against your own brother? Or would you have walked away to preserve the family relationship? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about family betrayal and the power of standing up for yourself. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear this message. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that you are stronger than you think and more deserving than anyone might tell you. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next video.